At 54, Ethan Hawke broke his silence and revealed the truth about Robert Redford that reached far beyond fame, film, and even the iconic Sundance legacy. Few actors in modern American cinema feel as human, as quietly electric, or as fiercely alive as Ethan Hawke. He is a man who has spent his entire life chasing questions more than answers, digging into the marrow of what it means to be alive. While Hollywood demanded polish, he offered honesty, where others sought acclaim, he chased meaning. And while many actors are remembered for their awards, Hawke is remembered for his restlessness, the sense that inside him lives a dreamer who refuses to sleep. But that restless dreamer didn't come from fame or success. It came from childhood, from uncertainty, from books, stages, empty rooms, late-night rehearsals, and the quiet ache of a kid trying to figure out where he belonged. This is the story of Ethan Hawke, the boy from Texas who never stopped searching, never stopped creating, and never stopped believing that art could rescue a life. Ethan Green Hawke entered the world on November 6, 1970 in Austin, Texas, a city with its own creative pulse, but his early life was anything but settled. His parents were young, still becoming themselves when they were suddenly responsible for someone else. His mother, Leslie, only 17 when Ethan was born, carried the weight of new motherhood with grace, even when the world around her was unstable. After his parents divorced, Leslie became the steady center of Ethan's life. The two moved often, from Texas to Atlanta to New Jersey and eventually to Princeton, tracing their own winding route through working-class America. The constant relocation forced Ethan to adapt quickly, to learn to observe people, to understand personalities and emotions. Without realizing it, he was training for a life on stage. Books were his sanctuary, stories became companions, theater became a map, and the stage, that glowing rectangle of possibility, became the one place where everything made sense. While some kids sought crowds or certainty, Ethan sought characters. He chased nuance. And in every school play, every rehearsal, every published script he devoured, he found pieces of himself reflected back. His mother noticed. She wasn't a stage mom pushing him towards stardom. She simply recognized that something in her son came alive under the lights. She nurtured it the only way she could, by exposing him to every performance she could afford, by encouraging him to audition, and by promising him that curiosity was not something to outgrow. That permission to be curious, to ask why, to dive deeper, became the foundation of Ethan Hawke's artistic philosophy. Acting wasn't an escape for Ethan, it was an awakening. By the time he reached high school, he wasn't just the kid who liked acting, he was the kid who needed it. He devoured plays by Tennessee Williams, Clifford Odets, and Shakespeare. He lingered after rehearsals to watch others explore scenes. He volunteered for roles that pushed him into emotional territory boys his age rarely dared to explore. At 13, he enrolled in acting classes in Princeton. He didn't just show promise, he showed hunger. The instructors weren't just teaching him how to perform, but how to think, how to observe, how to enter the psyche of another human being with empathy. And he thrived in that environment. Then, in a twist of fate that changes everything for a young actor, Ethan landed an audition for a major motion picture, Dead Poets Society. At 18, he stepped onto the set of what would become one of the most defining films of the 1980s. But to Ethan, it wasn't the fame that mattered, it was the craft. The people. The intense, electric energy of actors like Robin Williams and director Peter Weir. He wasn't dazzled by the machinery of Hollywood, he was mesmerized by the emotional truth unfolding in front of him. Dead Poets Society wasn't just a movie to Ethan Hawke. It was validation. Proof that his hunger wasn't misplaced. Proof that the quiet kid from Texas who never felt entirely grounded had found his home. But even then, standing on the edge of fame, Hawke wasn't satisfied. He didn't want applause. He wanted to go deeper. Unlike many breakout actors of his era, Ethan resisted Hollywood's golden boy machine. His contemporaries chased leading roles in big studio projects. Agents wanted to mold him into a poster-worthy heartthrob. Directors offered him roles that promised fame, exposure, money. But Ethan Hawke wanted something different, something riskier. He wanted authenticity. Throughout the 1990s, he gravitated toward roles that mirrored his own internal questions. Films like Reality Bites positioned him as a generational voice, disillusioned, introspective, rebellious. But his work was never cynical. He wasn't mocking his generation, he was trying to understand it. He embraced flawed characters. He embraced vulnerability. And without meaning to, he became the unofficial spokesperson for a young, restless America trying to figure out its place in a world that often felt hollow. But beneath the rising fame was a young man wrestling with identity. Who was he? A movie star, a theater kid at heart, a writer, a dreamer drifting through creative lives. He didn't know yet. And that uncertainty would shape the next chapters of his career. While Hollywood praised him, Ethan kept returning to the stage. Theater wasn't a fallback, it was his lifeline. It grounded him in a way film never could. On stage, he wasn't edited. He wasn't manufactured. He wasn't a product. He was raw. He was real. He was home. Through the mid-90s and early 2000s, Ethan poured himself into theater companies, rehearsals, workshops, and productions that offered no promise of fame or financial reward. He directed plays. He wrote novels. He collaborated with artists who cared more about truth than box office numbers. The stage allowed him to be imperfect. Film demanded precision, but theater demanded life. And Ethan Hawke was nothing if not alive. Many actors build careers by saying yes. Yes to the biggest roles, yes to the marketable choices, yes to whatever project will keep them trending. Ethan Hawke built his career by learning when to say no. No to roles that weren't honest. No to fame that demanded he become someone he was. No to a Hollywood culture that celebrated spectacle over soul. This didn't always make his life easier. There were roles he turned down that became massive hits for others. There were years when Hollywood wondered if he had lost his momentum. There were critics who misunderstood his choices. But Hawke wasn't chasing a career arc. He was chasing meaning. And that pursuit eventually led him into collaborations that redefined him, including the deeply human, quietly revolutionary Before trilogy with Julie Delpy and Richard Linklater. These films weren't traditional Hollywood romances. They were conversations. Long, intimate, wandering conversations about life and longing and the shifting tides of adulthood. They weren't blockbusters. They were truths captured on film. And they proved what Ethan had always believed. Art isn't about the moment. It's about the soul. As Ethan entered his 30s and 40s, he didn't settle, he expanded. He wrote novels. He directed films. He mentored young actors. He became a spokesperson for creative risk, encouraging artists to fail boldly rather than succeed quietly. He didn't pretend to have everything figured out. If anything, he embraced not knowing. His interviews became masterclasses in authenticity. His films became meditations on morality, loneliness, desire, faith, and the passage of time. His stage performances grew richer, more textured, more fearless. Ethan Hawke was no longer the restless teenager searching for identity. But he was still restless, still questioning, still exploring. He had not outgrown the dreamer inside him. He had learned how to let that dreamer lead. Now in his 50s, Ethan Hawke stands as one of the most respected actors of his generation, not because of awards, though he has earned plenty, but because of integrity. He remains a student of the craft, a lover of storytelling, an advocate for artists who dare to be vulnerable. He speaks openly about fatherhood, about mistakes, about growth. He embraces aging not with fear, but with curiosity. His later roles, intense, layered performances in films like First Reformed, Before Midnight, The Black Phone, and various independent projects, showcase a man who has turned uncertainty into power. Ethan Hawke carved a career defined not by perfection but by truth. And truth, for him, will always be more interesting than glory. In the history of American cinema, few names carry the kind of quiet thunder that Robert Redford's does. Not the manufactured kind of celebrity thunder, not the noise of scandals, headlines, and carefully curated personas, but the deeper rumble of a man who shaped the film world not by shouting but by creating. He was the handsome rebel who refused to be defined by his looks. The movie star who rejected the idea of being a movie star. The icon who turned away from power in order to give power back. Redford didn't just appear on the Hollywood stage, he reshaped the stage entirely. What began as the life of a young dreamer from Santa Monica would go on to ignite a movement that changed independent cinema forever. This is the story of Robert Redford, the quiet giant who believed deeply, stubbornly, fiercely that film could be more than entertainment. It could be a revolution. Robert Redford's story begins far from the glamorous myth that would later follow him. Born on August 18, 1936 in Santa Monica, he entered a world still bruised by the effects of the Great Depression. His family was hardworking, humble, and far removed from Hollywood's shimmering hills. His father, Charles, was a stern but steady accountant. His mother, Martha, was warm, encouraging, and deeply devoted to nurturing her son's curiosity. But life moved in unpredictable ways. As a child, Redford struggled to find where he fit. He was artistic, restless, mischievous. He didn't fully belong in the disciplined, structured world his father valued, nor did he yet understand the direction toward which his artistic impulses were pointing. Then tragedy struck. Redford lost his mother at a young age, an event that carved a quiet ache into him, a kind of emotional scar that would later inform some of his most heartbreaking performances. Her death wasn't something he spoke about often, but its impact was profound. It left him with an early sense of fragility, a deep awareness that life could turn suddenly. Growing up in Los Angeles may sound glamorous, but Redford's childhood wasn't the Hollywood version. He wasn't chasing film. He wasn't dreaming of fame. He was simply trying to understand the world and his place within it. He was a kid with talent but no direction. A boy with imagination but no map. The path he would eventually walk, toward art, acting, and cinematic influence, began not with ambition but with confusion. When Redford finished high school, he didn't head straight into acting or art or any creative field. He enrolled at the University of Colorado on a baseball scholarship, not because he loved baseball more than anything, but because it felt like the practical choice. But practicality never fit him. He partied too much. He felt out of place. He felt misunderstood. And slowly, unmistakably, he began to fall apart. Eventually, he lost his scholarship. Eventually, he dropped out. Eventually, he became a cautionary tale of a young man drifting toward nothing. But this low point became the unexpected beginning of everything. After leaving Colorado, Redford traveled to Europe, drifting through France, Italy, and Spain. For a young American in the 1950s, this kind of wandering was unusual, even radical. But for Redford, it changed everything. He spent days in cheap hostels sketching. He visited museums alone, absorbing centuries of artistic expression. He walked through cities that felt ancient and alive in ways America didn't. The world opened and he opened with it. Art, painting, drawing, creativity in its purest form lit something inside him. He saw that life wasn't meant to be boxed into expectations. It wasn't meant to be a straight line. He returned to the United States a different person, focused, hungry, awake. He enrolled in the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York. He traded baseball for scripts. He traded confusion for purpose. The boy who had lost his way had finally found a path. Redford's early years in New York were anything but glamorous. He wasn't an overnight success. He was a young actor trying to survive, auditioning, failing, learning. He studied method acting, he absorbed technique. He watched older actors with near-religious fascination. But despite the challenges, something about him was undeniable. Directors noticed the combination of striking looks and quiet intensity. He had the beauty of a Hollywood leading man, but none of the vanity. He had the sensitivity of a dramatic actor, but none of the melodrama. He was a paradox and a magnetic one. Small roles on stage eventually led to bigger ones. Television appearances gave him exposure. And by the early 1960s, he landed his breakout stage performance in Barefoot in the Park, a role that would eventually transition to film. Hollywood was calling. And reluctantly, carefully, he answered. When Redford arrived in Hollywood, the industry wanted to shape him into a perfectly packaged leading man. But Redford resisted from the start. He didn't want to be a heartthrob. He didn't want to be defined by beauty. He wanted to act, to explore, to tell stories with honesty and emotional depth. And then came Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. The 1969 classic wasn't just a hit, it was culture. Redford, alongside Paul Newman, created one of the most iconic duos in cinema history. Their chemistry was effortless, their energy was electric, their performances were intimate, charismatic, and deeply human. Redford wasn't just a handsome sidekick, he was a revelation. Suddenly, he was everywhere. The Sting, 1973. The Great Gatsby, 1974. 3 Days of the Condor, 1975. All the President's Men, 1976. These weren't just successful films, they were defining American stories. Redford became a generational symbol, not because he chased fame, but because he approached film with seriousness and vulnerability. His characters weren't superheroes or caricatures, they were real men wrestling with morality, power, justice, and truth. He wasn't loud. He wasn't showy. He was solid. He was thoughtful. He was present. He was the quiet giant, already growing into the man the world would one day revere. Most actors, after achieving the kind of success Redford had, would have leaned into it. They would have embraced celebrity. They would have become the face of every major studio project. But Redford wasn't like most actors. He was too curious, too restless, too hungry for more than Hollywood's expectations. While his peers focused on staying relevant, Redford focused on expanding, not his fame but his craft. He began directing. He began producing. He began studying storytelling from every angle. His directorial debut, Ordinary People 1980, stunned the industry. It was a quiet, devastating family drama, a far cry from the blockbusters he'd starred in, and it won the Academy Award for Best Picture. Redford wasn't just a talented actor. He was a visionary filmmaker. And yet, even as he climbed higher into Hollywood's inner circle, he felt something pulling him toward a different mission, one rooted not in prestige but in justice. In 1981, Redford did something unprecedented. He founded the Sundance Institute, a creative sanctuary designed not for stars but for the emerging, the unheard, the marginalized. At a time when Hollywood was obsessed with spectacle, sequels, and massive commercial hits, Redford turned his focus toward small, honest, human stories. He didn't want to protect the powerful. He wanted to protect the dreamers. Sundance wasn't just a workshop, it was a philosophy, a belief that filmmakers deserved space to experiment, fail, discover, and collaborate without commercial pressure. Then came the Sundance Film Festival, which transformed independent cinema forever. Suddenly, unknown filmmakers, people like Quentin Tarantino, Steven Soderbergh, Darren Aronofsky, and countless others, had a place to be seen, heard, and celebrated. Redford became a father figure to generations of storytellers, not by demanding loyalty, but by offering them opportunity. He built the ladder he wished he had when he was young. And then he stepped aside so others could climb it. As the film industry shifted into the 21st century, toward franchises, superheroes, and massive studio monopolies, Redford remained steadfast in his mission. Protect art. Protect truth. Protect the next generation. While many stars of his era faded or retired quietly, Redford kept working, not loudly but steadily. His performances grew more introspective, his direction more poignant, his public presence more meaningful. Films like A River Runs Through It, The Horse Whisperer, All Is Lost, The Old Man and the Gun, revealed an aging artist who wasn't clinging to youth but embracing the wisdom of experience. He didn't play heroes. He played men grappling with purpose, regret, legacy. Through these roles, he was telling the world something quietly profound. A man's worth isn't defined by his peak. It's defined by his evolution. Today, Robert Redford's legacy reaches far beyond the screen. He changed cinema in three profound ways. As an actor, he gave us characters who were real, flawed, charming, hopeful, devastated, complex. He didn't play symbols, he played souls. As a director, he proved that storytelling could be intimate and powerful without spectacle. He elevated emotional truth over special effects. As a mentor and visionary, through Sundance, he built a home for artists who had none. He didn't lift himself up, he lifted everyone else. Ask any independent filmmaker of the last 40 years, and they will tell you the same thing. Sundance didn't just give them a platform. Redford gave them permission. Permission to create. Permission to experiment. Permission to believe they belonged. And that influence, quiet, humble, compassionate, has spread across the world. The moment Ethan Hawke's path crossed with Robert Redford's wasn't dramatic. There were no cameras. No thunderous applause. No Hollywood handshake crafted for publicity. It was quiet as Redford himself. But the significance of that moment rippled through Ethan's life and career in ways neither man could have predicted. It wasn't a meeting of equals. It wasn't even a meeting of mentor and student, not yet. It was a meeting of two artists at vastly different chapters in their lives. One young, raw, and searching. One older, seasoned, and purposeful. Hawke was just beginning to understand the kind of actor he wanted to be, the kind who pursued truth, discomfort, vulnerability. Redford was already the architect of a filmmaking revolution, a quiet giant who had spent decades using his influence to nurture young artists rather than overshadow them. Their paths didn't collide. They aligned. In 1994, Ethan Hawke had just completed Before Sunrise, a film unlike anything Hollywood was chasing. The industry was leaning into spectacle, action franchises, big-budget studio hits, loud films that demanded attention. But Before Sunrise, it whispered. It was a movie built on conversation. Two people one night wandering through Vienna, exploring love, loneliness, and the fragile intensity of youth. No explosions. No villains. No studio-approved formula. Just words. Just hearts opening. Just truth. The film was intimate, gentle, and introspective. Everything Hollywood executives often dismissed as too small, too slow, or too artistic. And Ethan knew that. He loved the project deeply. He knew it was special, but he also knew the film didn't fit the commercial mold. He was in that delicate space so many young artists know, proud of his work, terrified it would vanish without anyone noticing. He didn't need fame. He needed validation. Not applause, belief. By 1995, Redford was more than a movie star. He was the founder of the Sundance Institute, the guardian of independent cinema, the quiet advocate for films that dared to be personal. He had spent years nurturing young voices, the dreamers, the misfits, the visionaries, not out of obligation but out of conviction. And when Before Sunrise crossed his desk, something stirred. Redford saw what many studios didn't. A film that dared to trust its audience. A film that didn't manipulate emotion but invited it. A film content to be human rather than spectacular. Redford didn't see small. He saw truth. And so, without hesitation, he made a decision that would change Ethan's life. He invited Before Sunrise to open the 1995 Sundance Film Festival. Not midweek. Not hidden in a late-night slot. Not tucked between larger projects. He put it at the very front. He opened the festival with it. He gave it a place of honor. Because Redford knew what that gesture meant. He knew what it communicated, to audiences, to the industry, and most importantly, to the young artists behind the film. This matters. This deserves to be seen. This is cinema. It was a cold night in Park City when Before Sunrise premiered at Sundance. The theater was packed, critics, filmmakers, students, dreamers, locals, people eager to discover something new, something real. Ethan Hawke arrived nervous. Not because he questioned the film, but because he wasn't sure if anyone else would understand it. Then Robert Redford walked onto the stage. There was no grand speech. No dramatic monologue about art or passion or rebellion. Redford simply introduced the film. But for Ethan Hawke, that moment landed with the force of a lifetime. Redford spoke about the beauty of small stories. He spoke about the courage of intimacy. He spoke about the magic of two people connecting on screen, without Hollywood flash, without pretense. And then, with the warmth of someone who truly believed in the project, he turned to the audience and said words that Ethan would remember for decades. "This is a real movie." Ethan later said that Redford's introduction made the film feel legitimate, proper, in a world that often ignored films that dared to be subtle. It wasn't just validation. It was awakening. Standing there, listening to Robert Redford speak about the film with respect and admiration, Ethan felt something settle inside him. The confirmation that he did belong in the world he was chasing. Not because Hollywood said so. Because Redford saw him. There are mentors who instruct. Mentors who lecture. Mentors who shape careers through constant guidance. And then there are mentors like Robert Redford, mentors who guide through example, not instruction, through quiet faith, not loud validation. Redford never called Ethan to give him advice. He never positioned himself as a father figure or creative supervisor. He never forced a relationship. Their mentorship was subtle, built on respect rather than hierarchy. It lived in small interactions. A backstage conversation after a screening. A nod of encouragement during a Q&A. A brief but meaningful backstage moment where Redford reminded Ethan that art must always come before applause. Hawke didn't need Redford to say, "I'm your mentor." He felt it. He recognized it. He absorbed it. Because Redford embodied everything Hawke hoped to become. A man who protected art. A man who valued honesty. A man who didn't let fame corrupt his purpose. What made their connection so powerful wasn't their differences, it was their similarities. Both men came from backgrounds marked by uncertainty. Both were restless thinkers. Both were drawn to authenticity rather than spectacle. Both were allergic to the Hollywood machine. Both believed deeply in the transformative power of storytelling. Both used their careers to explore identity, morality, and the complexity of being alive. Redford saw a younger version of himself in Ethan Hawke, a kid chasing meaning, not attention. And Ethan saw in Redford the kind of artist he hoped he might one day become, not a star but a guardian of the craft. They were not friends in the traditional sense. They were not collaborators on screen. They were not part of the same generation. But spiritually, creatively, artistically, they spoke the same language. The Sundance opening wasn't just a milestone in Ethan's career. It was a turning point. After that night, before Sunrise gained legitimacy, critics began paying attention. The film slowly built a loyal, passionate audience, and Ethan Hawke gained confidence that would fuel an entire trilogy, Before Sunset, Before Midnight, and shape his future as a deeply introspective actor. More importantly, Ethan internalized Redford's philosophy. Art matters most when it is personal. It's a philosophy that shaped Hawke's entire career. It's why he chose challenging, unconventional roles. Why he wrote books. Why he directed films. Why he mentored younger actors. Why he dedicated himself to theater as much as film. Redford didn't teach Hawke these things directly. He showed him, and Hawke carried those lessons forward, passing them down to the next generation the same way Redford once passed them to him. The beauty of their relationship was its subtlety. There were no dramatic mentor speeches. There were no emotional sit-downs. No dramatic falling-outs. No headlines announcing their connection. It was quiet, organic, human, and because of that it was real. Redford didn't shape Hawke's career. He shaped Hawke's ethos. And Ethan in turn became that quiet, steady presence for younger actors, the same way Redford had once been for him. That is the legacy of true mentorship. It moves silently from one generation to the next. It grows not through praise but through belief. It lasts not because it's celebrated but because it's lived. Years later, long after the festival lights had dimmed and both men had lived entire lifetimes of creative triumphs and personal evolution, Hawke shared a story, one that surprised almost everyone who heard it. He revealed that the last time he saw Robert Redford, the film icon didn't offer deep philosophical advice or grand reflections on legacy. Instead, Redford pulled him aside and gave him style advice. He told me, Hawke said, laughing, to stop wearing cowboy hats because people will think I'm losing my hair. It was funny, unexpectedly so. But beneath the joke was the real truth Hawke had never said aloud. Redford had been looking out for him quietly, consistently, for decades. Advice about a hat wasn't really about a hat. It was the final expression of care from a man who had guided Hawke since he was young. And Hawke admitted something deeper, something he had kept private until now. Redford was one of the few people who ever gave him genuinely good advice. Not career moves. Not fame strategies. Human advice. Life advice. And here was the shock for many fans. Hawke revealed that Redford had championed him at times when almost no one else did, helping shape the trajectory of his career in ways the public never knew. It wasn't loud. It wasn't public. It was Redford's quiet way. That was the real revelation. Redford had been one of the hidden architects of Hawke's career. When Robert Redford passed away at 89, the world mourned a legend, an actor, a filmmaker, a visionary. But for Ethan Hawke, the loss was personal. Not because of the big moments, but because of the small ones: Sundance introductions, unexpected encouragement, subtle nudges toward staying true to oneself. In interviews, Hawke never spoke with heaviness, he spoke with warmth, gratitude. He was helpful and kind to me when I was younger, he said. He was the first real champion of Before Sunrise. And in that remembrance, Hawke offered something more meaningful than praise. He offered honesty. He revealed that Redford's influence wasn't something he paraded around or used for publicity. It was something he carried quietly, like a private compass. Today, Hawke continues to act, direct, write, and transform himself, sometimes shaving his head, altering his posture, or pushing his body to embody a new character. But each time he steps onto a set or into a rehearsal room, he carries the echo of Redford's early belief in him. And perhaps that is the most powerful legacy of all. One artist planting a seed in another, trusting that it will grow into a forest long after he is gone. Ethan Hawke's final tribute is simple, understated, and unforgettable. Redford didn't just change his career. He changed the way Hawke saw himself. And sometimes the deepest truth is the quietest one.